Before a warrior can wield a weapon of the gods, he must first prove he is worthy of it. And the gods do not test a man with easy victories. They do not test him with battles he already knows how to win. They test him with an opponent he cannot possibly defeat. They send him a challenge designed not to measure his strength, but to find the limits of his spirit. To see what happens when the world's greatest archer runs out of arrows. To see who he becomes when his pride is broken into 1,000 pieces on the cold mountain earth. This is the story of Arjuna's penance in the Himalayas, and of the strange, wild hunter who met him there, a hunter who would teach him that the greatest battles are not fought for victory, but for surrender. The story begins in exile. The Pandavas, having lost everything in the rigged game of dice, wandered the forests, their crowns replaced with matted hair, their silk robes with the bark of trees. The shame of the Sabha still clung to them. The thought of the coming war was a shadow that never left their hearts. Yudhishthira, the eldest, knew that valor alone would not be enough to face the armies of Hastinapura. They needed something more. They needed divine aid. On the advice of the great sage Vyasa, it was decided Arjuna, the pillar of their strength, would undertake a severe tapasya, a spiritual austerity, to win the favor of Lord Shiva and obtain the Pashupatastra, a celestial weapon of unimaginable power. So Arjuna journeyed north, leaving his brothers behind, climbing higher and higher into the silent, snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. This was the abode of the gods, a land where the wind carried the whispers of ancient mantras, and the silence was so profound it felt like the breath of the universe itself. For months he stood on one leg, arms raised to the heavens. He ate only fallen leaves, then only air. The forest creatures, sensing the purity of his purpose, gathered around him without fear. His body grew lean and hard as mountain rock. His mind, once a river of thoughts, became a single, unwavering arrow pointed at the feet of Mahadeva. He was no longer a prince. He was a prayer. And one day, the universe decided to answer. But the answer did not come as a vision of a radiant god. It came in the form of a demon named Mukha, sent by Duryodhana to kill Arjuna in his vulnerable state. The demon took the form of a colossal wild boar, its eyes like burning coals, its tusks like curved scythes. It charged through the forest, tearing up trees by their roots, its roar echoing through the sacred valleys. Arjuna's meditation was broken. His warrior instincts, dormant for months, flared to life. He seized his Gandiva, the bow that had never failed him, and in a single fluid motion nocked an arrow. The boar thundered towards him. He drew the string to his ear. He released. At that exact infinitesimal moment, from the dense foliage nearby, another arrow flew. Both projectiles struck the boar at the very same instant. The great beast shuddered, roared a final earth-shaking cry, and fell dead. Arjuna lowered his bow, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. And then he saw him. Stepping out from behind an ancient tree was a man unlike any he had ever seen. He was a Kurata, a tribal hunter of the mountains. He was clad in animal skins, his hair matted and wild, his body lean but rippling with a raw, primal strength. In his hand, he held a simple, rough-hewn bow, and on his face there was a mocking smile. "A fine shot," the hunter said, his voice deep and resonant, "but unnecessary. The beast was already mine." Arjuna stared. A prince of the Kuru dynasty was not accustomed to being addressed in such a way, especially by a forest dweller. "Your arrow?" Arjuna replied, his voice tight with disbelief. "I am Arjuna, son of Pandu. This was my kill." The hunter laughed, a sound like stones tumbling down a mountainside. "Your name means nothing to this forest. The law of the hunt is simple. The first arrow to strike claims the prize. My arrow was first." And so began an argument over a dead boar, but it was never about the boar. It was about pride. Arjuna's pride as the world's finest archer, and the hunter's pride, which seemed as vast and unmovable as the mountains around them. Words quickly turned to threats. Arjuna, his patience exhausted, his royal blood offended, finally declared, "Enough talk. Let our weapons decide who is the better archer." The hunter's eyes gleamed. "I was hoping you would say that." What followed was a duel that defied reason. Arjuna, master of celestial archery, unleashed a torrent of arrows. He shot them with such speed they seemed to form a continuous stream of light. Any other warrior in the world would have been reduced to dust, but the Kirata simply stood there, smiling. He swatted some arrows out of the air with his bare hands. Others he caught mid-flight. Most of them simply vanished, absorbed by his body as if striking empty air. Arjuna's arrows, which could pierce mountains, could not touch the skin of this simple hunter. Disbelief turned to shock, and shock to desperation. Arjuna summoned his divine astras, weapons that could boil oceans and level cities. They flew from his bow, trailing fire and lightning, and they all failed. In a matter of moments, Arjuna's quivers, the inexhaustible quivers gifted to him by the fire god Agni, were empty. For the first time in his life, the archer had no arrows left to shoot. He threw the Gandiva down in rage and drew his sword, charging the hunter. He brought the blade down with all his might. It struck the hunter's shoulder and shattered into a dozen pieces. He picked up rocks. They crumbled to dust before they reached their target. He tore a tree from the earth and swung it like a club. The hunter took the blow without flinching, and the tree splintered in Arjuna's hands. Finally, there was nothing left but his body. Arjuna, the peerless warrior, lunged at the hunter to wrestle him. He was met with a strength that was not of this world. The Kirata seized him, lifted him into the air as a child lifts a toy, and threw him to the ground with bone-jarring force. Arjuna lay there, broken, defeated, humiliated. Every weapon, every skill, every ounce of his legendary strength had been proven useless. His pride, the last and most stubborn of his possessions, lay in ruins around him. But in that moment of absolute defeat, something incredible happened. The warrior vanished, and the devotee returned. He dragged himself to his feet, ignoring his bruised body and his shattered ego. He gathered mud from the ground and fashioned a small lingam, the sacred symbol of Shiva. He picked wildflowers from a nearby bush, and with his eyes closed, placed them on the idol, whispering the name of the god he had come here to find. When he opened his eyes, he gasped. The flowers he had just placed on the clay idol were now resting on the matted hair of the Kirata hunter, who stood watching him with an expression of profound love. The truth struck Arjuna like lightning. The one who had broken his body was the very one to whom he had been praying. The obstacle was the goal. The test was the blessing. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, and bowed his head. "Mahadeva," he whispered. The rough form of the hunter dissolved. In his place stood Lord Shiva in all his radiant glory. The crescent moon adorned his hair, the river Ganga flowed from his locks, and his third eye, the eye of cosmic knowledge, was closed. His form was luminous, his smile was the dawn. "Arjuna," Shiva said, his voice the sound of creation itself, "I am pleased with your valor, not the valor of your arms, but the valor of your spirit. You fought until you had nothing left, and when you were defeated, you did not despair. You returned to your faith." He explained that a divine weapon is not merely a tool of destruction, it is a responsibility. A divine weapon cannot be wielded by a hand that trembles with ego. To receive the Pashupatra, Arjuna first had to be emptied of the pride that came with being Arjuna the great warrior. He had to be broken, so he could be remade. He had to lose, so he could become worthy of winning. And so there on that Himalayan peak, Lord Shiva bestowed upon the humbled prince the weapon he had sought. The battle was over. The prayer had been answered. This story is not just about a god in disguise. It is a map of the human soul. We all pray for strength. We ask the universe for the tools to overcome our obstacles. But we so often misunderstand how that prayer is answered. We expect a gift, a sudden power, an easy path. But the Mahabharata teaches us that the universe often answers our prayer for strength by sending us an opponent we cannot defeat. It sends us a challenge that shatters our ego, a trial that empties our hands of every weapon we thought we could rely on. Because it is only when we are left with nothing, no pride, no easy answers, no familiar strength, that we are finally ready to receive the grace we were seeking all along. Perhaps the greatest blessings do not arrive as gifts. They arrive as battles that prepare us to receive them. Think about that.